40 years ago, in 1983, an organization was formed by the name of the Patrons of the Arts in the Vatican Museums. The Vatican Museums were going to have a large exhibit, travel to the United States, make a stop in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. And every object in that exhibition needed to be studied carefully restored before it was sent on this big voyage. And a group of Americans decided that they were going to support that endeavor. And so mostly from New York and Los Angeles. And they started what is now known as the Patrons of the Arts in the Vatican Museums. So in the end of October, beginning of November, we traveled to Rome with representatives of the chapters that are now throughout the world to celebrate this 40th anniversary. And our Minnesota and North Dakota chapter sent about 30 people to this get-together, and Father Griffith was with us, as he is our local chaplain, and we had some wonderful experiences there. So, Father Griffith, anything you would like to say was a highlight for you?
Well, certainly meeting Pope Francis. I had been in some general audiences with Pope Francis, but never had the opportunity to meet him. And literally 300 people were able to meet Pope Francis. And I didn't think it would happen, that he would, he has had some health issues, and particularly some lung issues, and shaking hands with that many people, I thought, well, this is not going to happen. And sure enough, he did. He's a Pope of surprises, a man of a generous spirit, and it was really neat. But even more, kind of moving than personally meeting him, I really enjoyed how excited our parishioners and friends were. They were almost giddy, and it was really neat. I think our group really has a lot of admiration for this Pope, for Pope Francis. And so that was a particular highlight. I had the opportunity to celebrate the opening Mass on the Sunday that led us into the events, and I was a little nervous. We had con-celebrating priests, and we had about 200 plus folks there at the Basilica of St. Mary of the Martyrs and the Angels. And of course, you can, everywhere you turn in Rome, there's another beautiful church. So we talked about truth, goodness, and beauty. I did in that opening homily, and that was a theme throughout the week. It was talked about by the Archbishop, who is in charge of St. Mary Major, and Pope Francis mentioned truth, goodness, and beauty in his address to the patrons. So, Johan, thank you for inviting me and the group to be chaplain, and on this trip, it was very, very moving, a very moving week in so many ways.
So, the Vatican Museums is one of a handful of museums, 5, 6, 7, that welcomes 7, 8, 9 million people every year. And the collections of the Vatican Museums, they actually are very extensive. They have Etruscan art, Greek art, Egyptian art, early Christian art, of course, the Sistine Chapel, many wonderful paintings. But there's also a new museum now as part of the Vatican Museums. Pope Pius XI, in the 1920s, invited missionaries to send art from around the world for an exhibit of art from throughout the world. And so tens of thousands of objects, I believe 120,000 objects, were sent to the Vatican for this exhibit. Many of them were sent back after the exhibition, but about 60,000 objects remained in the Vatican. And so a new museum was set up for this purpose, called the Ethnological Museum. Pope Francis, about 5, 6 years ago, had this idea that this museum needed to be lifted up. And when he talked about it, he said, I want the art from Papua New Guinea, from the Americas, from Africa, from Asia, to be considered on the same level as Caravaggio, as Michelangelo, as Raphael, And so he had this vision of a museum that is completely transparent, where art from Oceania can dialogue with art from Africa and Asia. And so this vision of his is slowly being realized. And one of the evenings that we were in the Vatican Museums, because we had the opportunity to go into the museums after hours without the 6, 7, 8 million other people, and we were hosted in the Anima Mundi Museum, the spirit, the soul of the world museum, and to see the objects that had been exhibited before, but now lifted up to this level of this museological level is quite striking.
Yeah, and those opportunities were another real highlight. I mean, to have that time in the museums and to really walk around at leisure, and they had some beverages and were very hospitable. The Vatican really rolled out the red carpet, which makes a lot of sense because these are folks who are really contributing generously to the arts, to the restoration of the arts. And my understanding, Johan, is that the Minnesota and North Dakota chapter really supported that Anima Mundi museum, that was something that really was a focus and a priority. But it was wonderful, and I remember the opening evening we had a reception, and then other times we had an opportunity to see St. Peter's lit up at night in a way that was just stunning. At least 2 of the evenings
from the gardens.
Mm-hmm. and it was really stunning. And wherever you go, you see St. Peter's because it's so big. And is really just that landmark in terms of where you are in Rome.
One of the other moments that I found very worthwhile is when we had a presentation by several of the restoration artists about how they do their work, and it's amazing. It is so scientifically driven. And some of the best restoration artists work in the Vatican Museums, and some of them have done it for generations. Dr. Persegati, for instance, her father was the director of the museums. But to hear them talk about each work of art that they restore, they enter in some sort of a relationship. They want to know the story of the piece of art.
So the other thing that was apparent in those presentations was the great love and passion they have for their work and for their arts. I mean, they literally came alive as they were describing their work. I was also struck by, the principal folks who spoke were all women, doing this really, really important work. It was striking that, as you had mentioned, Johan, their family histories, how many years they had been doing this work, and the passion that they have for the arts was infectious. It was really moving to see.
Yeah. We also had a wonderful concert in the Sistine Chapel with the Sistine Chapel Choir, and to be able to be in the Sistine Chapel for an hour and a half maybe, and to really experience the art as it was intended to be experienced, not just being herded through, but to just sit there in the presence of these wonderful frescoes by Michelangelo. Was a highlight for me.
Yeah, it was moving, and you see the art and the experience come together. So you're taking in the beauty of the frescoes, and you have the beauty of the music in this really lively setting. Now, I've said this on a couple of occasions. One of my highlights of the trip. So Johan knows a lot of people, and he knows a lot of people throughout the world, and certainly through the PABM group. And so there were all sorts of people in this setting, including the head of the Vatican City State, the Cardinal who is the Secretary of State, Pietro Parolin, and they were all there. And Johan was literally, I told him in our group, that I've seen people work a room before. I've just never seen anybody work the Sistine Chapel before. But it was fun to see, and you were in your element, and I was grateful to be there. It was as were our parishioners and friends. Everybody was moved by the whole experience. And just a quick note about truth, goodness, and beauty. They're known in the philosophic tradition, the Catholic tradition, as the transcendentals. So they really are rooted in God and God's gratuitous gift that He gives us, that God gives all of humanity. And particularly truth, goodness, and beauty allow us to transcend ourselves and to really touch the face of God in a way that is transformative. And they work. I just heard this before our concert at St. Thomas University. The Basilica Cathedral Choir was there, and there was a theologian who talked and really rooted truth, goodness, and beauty in that foundation. And what he said is they all penetrate the other. We should be able to see beauty and truth and goodness, and in goodness we should see beauty and truth, and the three work together in a way that is really beautiful. And so all of that, one of the takeaways that I came away with is that Rome is a teacher and an instrument, a place hospitable to truth, goodness, and beauty. I think of the great saints who have been canonized there, the great saints who have lived there, and also just the daily work that people do serving the poor. It's been a focus of Pope Francis to open up the Vatican and St. Peter's Square for those who are needing health care, needing water, needing food, and other services.
I wonder if with the three transcendentals, truth, yes. Goodness, yes. But sometimes I feel that beauty is considered the lesser of the three. And yet it's so important. And the Church has embraced beauty from the very beginnings as a great tool as well. Beauty lifts people up to God. Beauty, take away the arts from the liturgy, and what do we have left? The arts serve the liturgy well, and the arts really serve our evangelizing purpose as well. Some people will take issue with the Vatican Museums and all this art, and I must say, when Pope Francis became Pope, and I knew of his love for caring for those who are in need, and I thought, I wonder what he will do with the Vatican Museums. And I spoke with my colleagues, and there's, we have to see what he's going to do. But he does accept and realize and embrace the fact that beauty is one of the three transcendentals, and celebrates it, even in the talk he gave to us in the Clementine Hall, where he spoke about the importance of art and beauty in our lives, in our church, and for our world, particularly today. I was struck by the fact that though we were there to celebrate this anniversary and celebrate the arts, that at almost every time we gathered, that there was mention made of what's going on in the world, with the wars that are going on, and calling us to prayer and to work toward end of hatred and wars. So that was really striking to me.
And I think life without beauty would be empty. Beauty is integral to our human flourishing, and it's so central. I think of the beauty of a sunset, or I told the story about being at St. Paul outside the walls a number of years ago, and there was a confluence of the wind. There was a string quartet practicing. The light was coming in and hitting the mosaics in a particular way, and I was just really struck by how amazing it was. And I think I agree with you. I think beauty sometimes is seen as something that is, dispensable, and it's not. It's integral. And I think of Pope Francis, and it's wonderful that he has emphasized beauty along with goodness and truth. And I'm not surprised in the sense that he's a very cultured Jesuit priest as well. And he actually often makes literary references to pieces of music or operas, and in a way that you can see that he has lived an integrated life. Pope Benedict XVI as well really often emphasized beauty. And it's really beauty saves, which you've quoted John Paul II. So you see the different personalities of the popes over the years, but there's been some strong connection points, and I think in emphasizing the transcendentals. But I think you're right to really emphasize that beauty should not take a second or third seat, but really is part of that triad in a way that's beautiful.
Yeah, and when we look at the Pope since the Second Vatican Council, Saint Pope Paul VI started after the Second Vatican Council, he wrote a letter to women, to workers, to children, and he wrote a letter to artists about the importance of their work for the church and for the world. And then St. Pope John Paul II wrote this magnificent little letter. It's called Letter to Artists, that I often quote. And Pope Benedict XVI then celebrated the 10th anniversary of that letter in the Sistine Chapel, welcoming artists. So there is a clear trajectory of the Pope since the Second Vatican Council, lifting up the arts, celebrating the arts, and inviting us to contribute and to support and to preserve, as the Church has done for 2 millennia.
Well, and it strikes me, the two of the central things that the Church has been known for, I think rightly, is being the greatest patron of the arts in Western civilization. I don't know of anyone who would be ahead of the Church, but also the greatest servant of the poor in the Western tradition. And I think the two go hand in hand, are certainly consistent with the transcendentals, but sometimes, Johan, we hear people say, well, I don't really want to restore the beautiful Basilica Church. I want to focus on the humanistic side, which I understand, that makes sense, but the Church has always done both. And it's never been mutually exclusive. The Church is both and, which flows from the incarnation of God, that Jesus is both divine and human. And so the whole tradition of the Church, it's not faith or reason, it's faith and reason. It's not faith or works, it's faith and works. And it's really understood as dialectic and unitive. And so here at Basilica, and again, I can't take any credit for it because I'm a new pastor, but I really commend you and our other colleagues and our parishioners for really emphasizing both. I think it's healthy that sacred liturgy and the arts and music are transformative, and from that place of transformation, we're called to transform the world around us and to care for our brothers and sisters. So yes, we need to restore our beautiful church because it is itself an icon. It's the temple of God's presence. I can't think of anything more worthy, frankly, of our resources. But from that place of being transformed, we then go out and do that work. And I think both are integral to who the church is.
It reminds me of when we thought of purchasing Timothy Schmaltz's Homeless Jesus, which is in front of the Basilica. There was conversation about, well, should that money be used directly to serve those who are in need? And it's not that we took money away from them, but we engaged in conversation with people who are unhoused and who come here to help. And they were so struck by the fact that Jesus would be depicted as one of them. And to me, it said, when people come to the Basilica for assistance, they get assistance, but they get more than that. They are served in a beautiful building. They are served in a building that houses art. They are served in a building where we worship God. And so that is that serve value that you don't get when you go to, other places that can help you. And as you say, it's both both and, never one exclusive to the other.
I'm reminded, as you tell that, I'm reminded of celebrating a funeral at Basilica, I think within maybe my first 6 to 8 months as pastor. And there, at a certain point, we're celebrating the liturgy, and there's a homeless man who walks down the ambulatory, the side aisle, with his sleeping bag. Now, yes, we're sad about the presence of homeless people in the Twin Cities and the fact that it continues to be a pressing problem, but I was also heartened by the fact that this man felt welcome, that he knew that nobody was going to just usher him out or scoff at this or shame him, but rather this was a place that he was welcome. And it just struck me as something that I think is, it's quite lovely and it's quite true about this community at Basilica of St. Mary. And it's a value I have, I know it's a value you have, and our other colleagues, including Janice Anderson, that this is who we are. We are truly an inclusive community. It's one of the things that we want to really emphasize in this BasiliCAST, in this podcast, that, if we are rooted in an understanding of shared humanity and that we're all in this together, we want to hear one another's stories. We want to welcome one another and learn from one another. And I think that message is going to be really an important emphasis of our time in this podcast.
And one other aspect I wanted to talk about is I mentioned the Anima Mundi Museum and the art coming to the Vatican Museums donated by missionaries. In establishing the Anima Mundi Museum, every single object is studied in depth, and the descendants of the people who created these pieces of art are being contacted to ask them, would you want this object to be returned, or would you like the object to be kept in the Vatican Museums? So all the objects there have invited a dialogue with communities throughout the world. Sometimes those communities are deep in the Amazonian forest. And if the people want the objects back, then the objects are restored and are sent back. So we can be assured that all the objects on exhibition are there with the blessing of the people the descendants of the people who actually created them, which I think is a wonderful model for museums to follow.
One other point about our time in Rome, which was really wonderful, is that we were accompanied by just extraordinary autumn weather. And my colleague was meeting with Archbishop Hebden, of course, let him know I was there, and he was probably thinking, okay, Father Griffith is traveling again. But in any event, he did text, or he told her that he's there at what is called by Romans St. Martin's Summer. And so there's a time in the fall between two St. Martin feasts. And it struck me as how, in our American society, we don't always integrate our faith tradition into our culture in a way that's collective. But in Rome, this is very much, you can see a mosaic of the Blessed Virgin, walking down the street and outside of the Vatican. And then you have this kind of parlance of St. Martin's Summer that non-Catholic Romans would refer to as well. And it was indeed quite beautiful weather to spend time in the Eternal City.
We just celebrated our 40th anniversary, onward to our 50th anniversary. And every year the Vatican Museums publish a wish book from which the different chapters can select a project to adopt and pay for the restoration. Our chapter has always, a Renaissance Madonna is just adopted like that. But contemporary art, of which there's quite a lot in the Vatican Museums. Many people probably don't realize that the Vatican Museums has a wonderful collection of contemporary art, which is initiated by St. Pope Paul VI. So our chapter usually ends up adopting those projects that are not very adoptable. So looking forward to the 50th anniversary. I hope that our chapter will continue to thrive and that you'll stay with us as our chaplain. We very much enjoy having you as our chaplain. And that maybe 10 years from now, we'll go back to Rome and celebrate our 50th anniversary.
That would be wonderful.
Thank you.